All right, guys, let us get through the second semester of all your TEKS and how to break down these units. Now, you're going to see a trend after after the Vietnam War. So we'll go through the early Cold War, Korean War, and then we'll get to Vietnam War. But after that, you're going to see kind of the TEKS become much more condensed with one another, especially when we get to your last two units of 1970s through the rest of modern today, that kind of thing. It's going to become straight thematic the way that it's broken down. And there's a reason for that, because there's a lot of policies that we're looking at, and it's really like foreign, domestic, and then there's going to be a few people that you're going to talk about, and then there's going to be tech. So it's a very easy breakdown, but the concepts are kind of difficult for students because they don't do well with policy, with just really anything that's economic or government. They tend to struggle with, and they'll get more of it next year, but those last two units really focus on it. So we'll get there. But we're going to start with early Cold War. That is the first unit that we come back from Christmas break into. This is going to be starting in January. I want to get these out to you now. So for those of y'all who are really enjoying creating your modules and stuff like that, you'll have this available for you to do that. I was always a worker over Christmas break. I couldn't help myself. So if you are like me and you do enjoy creating, and so you will find yourself working on the break because you enjoy it, not because you feel like you have to. If that's the way that you want to spend your time, then I want you to have this so that you can break down your TEKS properly for your pacing. So the first TEK that I set aside for this, let me see where we at. Early Cold War is right here, 8A. So with 8A, we have described U.S. responses to Soviet aggression after World War II, including the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, the Berlin Airlift, NATO, which is North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and John F. Kennedy's role in the Cuban Missile Crisis. These are pretty straightforward. I don't feel like I have to really explain too much, but for those of you who do not remember the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan and stuff like that, the Truman Doctrine is going to be the kind of like a declaration to the world by President Truman, and he's pretty much going to be saying that the United States will be involved in stopping communist aggression. Now, of course, communist aggression is definitely meaning Soviet Union aggression, but we don't say it like that. Got to be PC a little bit, right? So we say communist aggression, although that doesn't matter. Clearly, everyone knows that who we're talking about, including the Soviet Union, and they are going to see the Truman Doctrine as a call to war, and that's why we're going to officially enter the Cold War. Now, the Marshall Plan is kind of the way that we are going to help countries. So the Truman Doctrine is us. We are going to help you. If you are dealing with communist aggression, we are going to back you up. We are going to provide things for you to help you deal with that aggression. But how are we going to do that? A lot of these countries are coming out of World War II completely obliterated. The United States is still definitely a world power because we didn't really have anything happen here. We didn't. We had something happen close to home, but we're not really going to have anything crazy decimate our country. You know, yes, we had Pearl Harbor, but that's really the only incident here on the United States ground that is going to hurt us. And so we definitely come out on top again. And so we're in a position to help people. The Marshall Plan is going to allow us to financially help them rebuild their countries, because countries that are completely war-torn are not in a position to fight off communist aggression. So we'll help you build your country back while we also provide the military aid that you may need in order to fight off this communist aggression. And of course, this concept here is going to kind of morph into the domino theory, and we'll talk more about that in Vietnam. But when we're getting into this, we kind of want to give hints as to how this is going to play as we continue on into modern history in this second semester. Now, Soviet Union is not going to take well to this, so they're going to be pushing into their areas. Now, right after World War II, hopefully you have talked about the fact that Germany is going to split, and you'll have East and West Berlin. And that's where that split's going to be. And that's where we're going to see a lot of Soviet aggression towards the allies from World War II who have grouped together, especially the United States. Now, when we're going in, Soviet Union has taken East Berlin, and it is communist. And then there is West Berlin, which is technically the Allies, United States area, but they will have their independence later. And we're going to go in and try and supply aid to them. But the Soviet Union is going to block it with the Berlin blockade, which will be done with tanks. So now we can't get in. The only road in to deliver everything that we need to West Berlin is through that road that goes through East Berlin. So now we're going to have to find a way to do it. And it is going to be the Berlin airlift. We will be flying our planes through and dropping the aid to the people. I mean, you'll even have soldiers dropping candy to the kids. So, and this is going to show the world kind of the West's ingenuity. And of course, the Cold War is always the concept of what economic system is better. Is it capitalism and the free enterprise and the way things are set up in the United States? Or is it Soviet Union and capitalism, and communism, and which one is better? And this is going to be kind of like a proverbial point for the United States because they were able to skirt around this blockade that Soviet Union had done, and they're able to drop it by plane. Now, as things continue to get, beefed up between the Soviet Union and really the rest of the non-communist world, we will have NATO being created. And the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is pretty much going to be a way of saying, hey, if you get hit by Soviet aggression, I can protect you, and vice versa. So this is just another treaty of protection against communism. And it's mainly made up of allies, but of course there are other countries that do become involved simply for the protection from the Soviet Union. Later on in this TEAC, we get into John F. Kennedy, and it is going to be the Cuban Missile Crisis. And this is going to be Soviet Union setting up their missiles in Cuba, and of course that's super close to Florida. And these missiles can hit different parts of the United States, and so this is definitely a worry. And so we will end up with a naval blockade around that area of Cuba, and they're both close to DEFCON 1, hitting that buzz button and missiles going everywhere. And this is where we get the term MAD, which is MAD, and it's an acronym for mutually assured destruction. And we are very worried. People are very worried that the world is going to end because of this, nuclear standoff. And eventually the presidents call each other and they deal with it in a manner where they'll back off. Okay, and it's done. The United States agrees to take their missiles out of the Turkey area, and Russia agrees to remove their missiles out of Cuba. And that's kind of where it sits. Great movie on that that you can use for your students. Again, I'm a huge movie person, so I always love to offer movies to students. We'll move on to 8C. Now, the Korean War is short-lived, not like crazy big, but it is definitely a win for capitalism and freedom and things like that. So North Korea is going to try to take South Korea. They are going to attack South Korea. They're going to move past that 38th parallel, and the United States is going to get involved, and so is NATO, and they're going to fight back and forth. It's going to end up at a stalemate. Nobody can do anything, and they'll agree again to be at the parallel. And also remember that the parallel is set at the end of World War II during the Potsdam Conference, and so that's why that we have that 38th parallel for North and South Korea. And during the war, China will actually get involved and support North Korea. So Mao Zedong will go in with his support for North Korea to take South Korea. And Truman is very clear on the fact that he believes that we should be involved in this war, because if North Korea, if communism is able to take one, it will continue continue to try and take other countries that don't want to be communist. And as a proponent for that freedom, that political freedom, we are going to support South Korea and inevitably continue their ability to be a free nation. Now, Truman won't see the end of the Korean War, but before he's out, he is going to desegregate the military. So that is something that we're going to see during this time frame. He will be followed by Eisenhower, and Eisenhower is going to be doing some great things like the highway system. So the reason that we have the highway system is because of President Eisenhower. That is going to be his huge accomplishment. But Eisenhower is also going to, and this isn't necessarily in your TEACs, but it's going to follow up. It's going to follow you once we get to the civil rights. This is going to be a question that's often answered, and teachers forget to hit it when it actually happens. So Eisenhower is going to move people into the Supreme Court, and one of the ones that he moves is Earl Warren. And Chief Justice Warren will be a major ruler over our ruler judge on the case for Brown v. Board. So major focus here. Please do not forget to mention him, okay? So that way you're setting your kids up for the civil rights, because that unit for civil rights is a huge tested unit in many ways, because civil rights, the historical civil rights era is a huge tested unit, but it's connected to all of the civil rights issues that we discussed throughout the whole year. So definitely mention this so you have kind of already set that up for yourself now for later. So Eisenhower will be responsible for the GI Bill. There's going to be some other things that take place. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of 8C, except for the containment policy. I didn't mention that, but it really does fall into the Truman Doctrine and the idea here of really getting involved and helping any country that's dealing with communist aggression, because we want to contain communism. We don't want it to spread. And so it's the idea of like containing a disease, we're containing communism. And so the containment policy is really going to be what drives the Cold War as well as the Vietnam War and our involvement there. So start on that containment policy now during the early Cold War 1950s unit, and then move more into it when you get into Vietnam. But we're going to move on to 17B. 17B is identify the causes of prosperity in the 1950s, including the baby boom and the impact of the GI Bill. The effects of prosperity in the 1950s, such as increased consumption and the growth of agriculture and business. And this is actually going to encompass 24B, which is the Beat Generation, rock and roll. It's going to encompass 24C, which is global diffusion of American culture through various media, and 13A, which is rural to urban or Rust Belt to the Sun Belt migration. Okay, so 17B, you have to think about really the prosperity of the 1950s. I mean, you can teach the GI Bill, but first, because the GI Bill is technically signed into order by FDR, it's continued on through Truman and Eisenhower, and there's a lot that goes with the GI Bill. We don't get really too much into that necessarily. The idea here is that men come home from war and they haven't seen their wives or girlfriends a lot, whatever. There's lots of babies made, and we have the baby boom. Okay, so we have this huge population boom, and then we have a whole bunch of men who need jobs. They got drafted at an early age. They don't have any college experience. They need jobs, or they need a way to get experience to get the jobs, and so the GI Bill will be passed, and it is going to help them pay for them to go to school and for them to get homes. And so we're going to see the boom of suburbia. Suburbia is not really a thing up until this point. So we're going to see suburban homes be built in many different areas. It's great to show them the picture of this. Some of the kids don't realize that these are what we call suburbia, suburban homes, that Cracker Jack house style type thing, okay? And we're going to see prosperity because the United States came out of a war. Anytime we come out of a war, we have lots of money and lots of jobs for people. So these people are going to come out, they're going to go to college, get experience, they're going to buy homes, they are going to have lots of babies and have family. And so we've got this huge just prosperity in so many different arenas of life. And as this continues and these children are growing up, these people come home, children are close to teenage age, and we're going to see this explosion of rock and roll. And because these parents have money, this is kind of the first time that we're going to see young children, like teenagers, get jobs, and the diners and parlors and mechanics, or gas stations. Kids are going to start working. They're going to have their own money. But parents are also going to be giving their kids money. This is really kind of where we see the allowance thing start to become a thing. Kids are going to have money to spend, and they're going to spend it on records and stuff like that from the entertainment industry. And it's really going to help fuel that rock and roll movement. Later on, as we get a little further away from the first bust of rock and roll, we'll start to see more of the beat gen take place, which is kind of that cooler vibe, kind of more refined type of attitude towards politics and art and things like that. And you'll teach about both of those and how that's all connected. Everything is kind of interconnected to the GI Bill because they're getting money, they can buy homes, there's a baby boom, there's lots of things going on, suburbia and all these movements. And 13A is that Rust Belt to Sun Belt. We're going to see people start to move away from these factory cities and into suburbia, so furthermore into this rural idea. So at first we had this rural to urban where people are moving closer to the factories to get jobs. But now that homes are being built further away and people can sustain good living further away from the city, people are starting to move out of that Rust Belt, that factory area, and into the Sun Belt, that more rural area. And that's where we'll start to see the suburbia come into play. And let's see, but that's pretty much 17B. Make sure that you do mention that it is the GI Bill is the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. That is going to most of the time they do mention that, or they may mention GI Bill and then that. That's the best kind of question where the kids get both, and hopefully one of them reminds them of what we're talking about here. But do mention that. That is a vocab word to put on your word wall. Let's see. 8B. Okay. Describe how Cold War tensions were intensified by the House Un-American Activities Committee, which is also known as HUAC, H-U-A-C, McCarthyism, the arms race, and the space race. This is a great time to call them back to the 1920s Red Scare, Palmer raids, which was kind of, as I had said before, the birth of McCarthyism. It's the same concept of targeting specific people because we're worried about spies. So, really, House Un-American Activities Committee is it's a committee that is set into place for people to tell on their neighbor, and for the United States to start pulling people in and kind of linked up with that McCarthyism idea and ignore people's rights and their due process and stuff like that, and start drilling to see if people are spies for the Soviet Union. Now, or, commie spies and stuff like that. The House Un-American Activities Committee first starts by pulling in, and we call them the Hollywood 10. And the Hollywood 10 are going to be 10 Hollywood producers who are accused of being communists, and they're accused of kind of pushing those communist ideals and being spies and stuff like that. Now, they're eventually going to be let off the hook, but many, many Americans will be called in. You'll be called to testify on somebody, and if you don't testify against them, you could be blacklisted from your job. There's a lot of things that can happen if you don't just say that, yeah, it happened. It's really kind of like, the witch trials and stuff like that, where you're afraid that if you don't turn somebody in, or you don't just agree that yes, they are whatever you say they are, that you might be called into question. And then you have to consider, will I lose my job and my way of supporting my family and stuff like that if I don't just say what they want to hear? And of course, we'd like to say that the ethical thing would be to say the truth no matter what your consequences are. But in reality, people are afraid. They are afraid to lose their homes and their families and their jobs and everything else. And so, or possibly put in jail. So they are willing to just say whatever they need to say to get out of what's going on. And this is what really fuels that McCarthyism. This is what fuels any movement that has to do with targeting a specific group of people and ignoring rights in order to do so. So, and we'll see this further on. And of course, you can already start to make note to, hey, is there anything modern that's happened where we tend to ignore someone's rights because of where they're from, because of events that took place in the United States? Maybe even bring up the idea of racial profiling. And that might be their first clue that you're, looking forward towards 9/11 and what takes place after that, and how we tend to treat the immigrants after that, because it's really similar. Now, we do have a TEAC later on, which is 13B, analyze the causes and effects of changing demographic patterns resulting from immigration to the United States. So, like, when you're kind of drawing attention to things that they're going to learn later that they probably should have some kind of clue on. Now, also remember that your juniors were born after 9/11, but to consider the fact that they should somewhat know what 9/11 was, and then they can take that and think, okay, how were the people that were immigrating in from the area, right, from anywhere around the Middle East, or immigrating in from any other area but were of Middle Eastern descent, how did this affect them? How were they treated in the United States after this? Okay, that's very similar to how people who are from Eastern Europe are going to be treated during this McCarthyism time frame. Okay, during all of this, we've also got the arms race going on, which means everybody's trying to beef up their military, especially the United States and the Soviet Union. Okay, and of course, this is what's going to lead to that missile crisis. This is going to lead to that mutually assured destruction, where everyone's afraid that, we're building up way too much nuclear power and we're going to end up getting mad and someone's going to flip the switch and everybody's going to blow up. So we do have this taking place. And this is where the next TEAC on, where are we at? That was 17C. So, yeah. Describe the economic impact of defense spending on the business cycle and education priorities from 1945 to 1990s, because we're spending a lot of money on our defense, and so is the Soviet Union, and it's going to hurt the Soviet Union before it ever hurts us. And that's really going to be kind of their downfall here within the Cold War time frame. But we're spending a lot of money too and building up our military. And And then our education priorities kind of change and shift because this is kind of that first time that we see that our education shifts towards a more STEM focused education, science and math for technology, because we want people to grow up and put their knowledge towards the defense of the country and that high, patriotism that the United States has always kind of had. The last part was going to be the space race, and the space race is pretty much us all fighting to have the best space program. Now, Russia is going to be the first that launches into space, Sputnik in 1957. I always show a picture of Sputnik. You can just draw it. It's literally a circle with 4 legs on it. That's Sputnik. Maybe mention that they do send an animal into space. I don't know why I'm blocking. I can't remember if it's a dog or a monkey, but I think it's a dog. But they do send one into space. And that's not, well, this is the first satellite that was sent to space. And of course, 8B will also encompass 26A and 26B. Those are just your tech teaks. And that's really it for Cold War. I think that the biggest parts really are the international conflicts and the creation of NATO. And then 17B, which is everything that's going on domestically. And this is really what you're going to see. Foreign and then domestic, right? And then you are going to have your tech. This one, we don't really focus too much on the people because the presidential actions really falls into that foreign policy and domestic policy. We only focus on people when there's specific people that are called out for their contributions to the United States, or they're big stars or something, and they help change the course or the culture of the United States. The only one I didn't mention yet was 1C, and I think I had actually moved it to the next unit that's coming for Vietnam, but it's E pluribus unum and In God We Trust. It's a very simple teak. You just need to make sure the kids know what it means, why did it come about, and when. Okay, very, very simple. This is more like a warm-up or an exit ticket kind of thing. All right, that is Early Cold War and Korean War.